Serious. Drug dealers of Reddit, have you ever called CPS on a client? If so, what's the story? This was a long time ago, and I've since gotten clean and started my own family. But there was a girl I knew who was homeless with her newborn son. On Easter weekend, I was walking on this trail to go meet with some people to sell them a sack. It started raining and that, of course, made me mad. There's these bridges that cross over the top of the trail and lots of kids gather and smoke or get spun under the bridges. And that's where I found her. She was passed out drunk with some random guy under the bridge, while her newborn baby sat strapped in his car seat in the rain. He wasn't under the bridge. He was crying. And he looked dirty. I didn't have any children at this point, but I panicked seeing the little guy. I grabbed him, dropped all shit I was supposed to be selling, and walked off the trail and up the couple blocks to the police station. I told them what happened and where I'd found him. CPS took him, and he ended up getting adopted. Edit. Wow guys, thanks for the awards. Y'all are amazing. I like to believe I was just the first one to come across that scene. I want to think that nobody would leave an infant in the rain clearly being ignored/neglected by his obviously incapacitated mother/caretakers. You did good. That child may never know just how much your panicked decision changed his life, but it did. Good for you for turning your life around too. When I was selling to her, a lady shook her crying baby in front of me. I wigged out, took the baby, dumped $500 worth of cocaine and heroin, and called 911 from my car. She didn't put up a fight until the cops came to arrest her. She tried to sue me for kidnapping. Definitely not the best strategy for me. I was 18 and addicted pretty bad, but when the baby saw a doctor under state care, he was covered in bruises, a couple of burns, and had 2 broken ribs already. I'm convinced she would have killed him. He's 10 now, and happy and thriving. The whole experience and legal battle when she tried to have me charged with kidnapping is how I got sober. I used to deal way back when I was a hot mess in an extremely abusive relationship. I called CPS on not only one person, but 6. The one that sticks with me most though, not only because of the severity, but because I called twice, was this couple who used to pick up from me at a laundromat, and we ended up seeing each other often enough I felt okay to go to their place. I was so fucking floored when I stepped through that door. I kid you not, they had taken up all the carpeting in the house and had torn down the walls to get at the copper wiring and pipes. They had no electricity or running water. There was nothing in that house except for some sleeping bags in what used to be the living room. And then I noticed a nest of blankets with bright blue eyes peering at me over the pile, and realized that there was a toddler and a small child no more than 5. Until this point, I had never seen nor heard them talk about having kids. The poor kids were filthy and obviously malnourished. The house stunk of meth so badly I gagged. I couldn't believe it. I guess the look of shock was super apparent on my face because the dad said they were squatting and introduced me to their kids. I made some small talk and then left. The phone was ringing for CPS before I closed my car door. I gave them the address and let them know the conditions of the home, and they were squatting with 2 small children. Gave the names of the parents as I knew them, and the names of the kids. They ended up going to jail for the squatting, and the kids went to live with a relative. They ended up contacting me back to sell to them after they were bailed out of jail, and I never responded. However, the guy I was with at the time ended up selling to them, and they were living in a field in a tent with the kids. I got into a huge fight with my boyfriend over it and was so disgusted he still sold to them. I ended up calling CPS on them again. From what I heard from other people that knew them, the kids were taken permanently after that, and about a year later the mom ended up going to prison for attempted murder, and the dad went to prison for check fraud some weeks after that. Edit. I should have mentioned that I sold weed, shrooms, X, and acid. Former dealer here. It's been many years now, but I sold crack, heroin, pills, cocaine as a teenager. I once had a lady come in the trap house with a newborn. She was literally selling herself and or her baby for a few rocks. When I saw the newborn in shitty diapers and dirty as f, I knew I had to give her a few rocks. I'll let her smoke and leave. I also called BCW, Bureau of Children's Welfare, on her as soon as she walked out. She lived on my street. I couldn't let her try to sell her baby. I couldn't let her keep it either. I just couldn't call the police. The baby was in a foster home less than a week later. The lady disappeared shortly after. I never saw her again. I hope she never got the baby back. She was a real piece of shit. Some people should never get their children back. Lots of addicts try to sell kids for drugs. It's awful. I know CPS tries to keep families together, but sometimes the kid is just better off without the parent. Ah yes, back when I was younger, maybe 17, I got my first job at Domino's Pizza. One of my managers was a really scummy 24-year-old guy that looked like a troll, had astoundingly bad hygiene, and also a shitty attitude, but sold good weed and bought me cigarettes. This was my first experience having older friends able to get me good stuff on demand like that. One day he hooked me up with a friend of his that was selling mushrooms, so I met with that guy and bought an ounce, and then walked to my manager's house to sell him some, and also get some weed. So turns out him and his similarly aged sister, who has a 1-year-old baby, both live in makeshift bedsheet bedrooms in the basement of the tiny house. They smoked inside, windows closed. Cats everywhere, bugs everywhere, weird gross sour smells coming from all areas. Everything gross. Their mom was home, but she was senile and addicted to painkillers, as well as the sister. So we did the trade downstairs, and when I go back upstairs I go to the kitchen to throw some stuff away, and I see the baby in a high chair, eating a pack of cigarettes. He's just sitting there tearing them open, and putting in his mouth, and spitting it out. I ran downstairs and told the sister, and she just started yelling, "Mom, Mom, get the baby," a couple times lazily, then gives up and goes back to just sitting there. It was surreal. I hadn't ever experienced such neglect and disgust from people. I left and waited 2 days to call CPS because I didn't want my manager to know it was me who called. I know the kids got taken away and she went to live with a different family member, or at least that's what I was told. Real short and simple, yes. A friend of my girlfriend introduced us to her neighbors who were like 50 to 60-year-old hippies that looked like a bad acid trip but bought weed regularly for full price. Couple months down the road they start being more friendly with my girlfriend and I, and start talking more when we'd go drop off the The topic began with her telling us how she has custody of her daughter's oldest born because her daughter was sitting time at a women's prison. Backstory on the kid: looks 15 but clearly has the mind capacity of a 6 or 7-year-old. Not sure what was wrong with her specifically, but you could tell there were issues. Near the end of the conversation about her daughter, she brought up the fact that her granddaughter was prescribed Adderall 30XR, and whenever they got her prescription they'd dump all the little beads into a bowl to use whenever they couldn't find meth or whatever they needed, and instead fill the Adderall with Benadryl to make the kid sleep. Till this day I'll never forget the emotions I felt after getting out of there and sitting in my car. My hands were shaking so bad it was hard to Google information about CPS, much less type information in. I felt goosebumps in every pore of my scalp. As a father of 2, I never knew such evil existed. Obviously in movies and shit, but never experienced something firsthand like that. One of my friends used children's medicine to make her daughter sleep whenever she didn't want to deal with her. When the grandma took the baby in, there was a few months where she cried a lot. She was going through withdrawals because her mother had been giving her this pain medication for so long. Not sure if this counts, but in the late 1990s, I used to sell reefer part-time while I was in college. One of my regular customers turned his sister onto me. She called for a delivery. No big deal. I went there one time. She had 3 little kids, like a couple toddlers and an infant. Her house was full of cockroaches. I was disgusted. I called CPS. Not because of the drugs and babies, but because of how fucking filthy that house was. It caused a lot of problems for her and her boyfriend. They were in the system for a long time. Not sure how it all turned out. But that woman. I went to this disabled woman's house to bring the goods. It had been a while since I had seen her. I think her son was 13 the last time I had been there, and now he was 15. I asked her how he was doing. She began telling me he had been giving her a lot of trouble, and I couldn't imagine that cause he was such a good kid. I wish I could explain the no big deal tone she had when she told me this. kid's name, said he has had enough and that he was going to kill himself. He went to the bathroom and got a razor blade and cut his bicep down to the bone. I begged him to let me take him to the ER but he wouldn't. Ungrateful I know she saw the look of horror on my face. I told her I wanted to go say and went to talk with him. He told me she had a new boyfriend and all they do is drink, shoot up, and fight. He said he wanted to live with his dad, but he had a new family. I told him about telling someone at school about it, and he didn't want his mom to be in trouble. As an adult my dad had put me on 72-hour holds in the crazy house several times. I told him how a 72-hour hold could give him time to think about what to do next, have 3 meals a day, and someone to talk to. I know that's not great advice, but I was still using at the time and wasn't my best self. The good intention was there though. I ended up getting in a fight with her before I left. My son was a little younger than hers, and I couldn't imagine telling that story the way she did. I waited a week and called CPS, hoping she would know it was me. She did. Nothing ever came of it, and I still think about that boy all the time. Have used, sold, and middleman Xanax, weed and blow for a long time when money is tight. The only time I've called CPS was when this chick who was a regular for blow asked me to deliver a ball, 3.5G, to her house. I walk in, kid is asking for food. I think nothing of it. 4 hours later she calls me asking for a frontonogram. I go back to do it. Kid is ornery and still asking for food. 6 to 7 years old. 3 hours later at 8 AM she calls me asking for another frontonogram. I go back to do it. She always paid eventually, and kid is worse off, still hungry, and now crying. At that point I refuse the front, go home, and call CPS. I want my profit, but not when I can tell you're ruining your life. If I see people getting out of hand, asking for fronts, neglecting kids/bills etc., I tell them I'm dry, or I drop contact entirely. I'm doing what I need to provide for me and my own, not trying to ruin someone else's life. I worked with a young guy that showed up with a black Mustang one day. We asked, when did you get that car? He was hesitant to tell us but finally spilled. He was at a huge party over the weekend where drugs were flowing. He was sober first by courts then by choice. Point anyway, some girls were hitting the coke hard and wanted more. One girl was trying to get money to keep the coke party going. The guy came up with the idea for her to sell him her car for like 1 grand. She said no way at first, but then half hour later she was begging him to buy it. He was sober so took care of all the details.